My friends in Christ, there's a little story told about St. Dominic. Before he died, he was gathered with his disciples and followers, and they were very emotional, and they were crying. And St. Dominic said to them, "Why do you weep?" He said, "I can do more for you in heaven than I can ever do for you on earth." And as I was putting my words together for this weekend, the person that came to my mind was Father Morrow and his priesthood and his call for vocations to the priesthood. Father Morrow, in his life and his priestly life here, especially at Christ the King, always challenged us all to strive to do better in holiness and encourage priesthood or consecrated life. And as a church, we've been through a lot of scandals, and some of us have been discouraged and disheartened, angry, hurt with the leadership. And I know people would even question the fact, even the call to priesthood or religious life. I think of parents who might hold back in encouraging their son or their daughters to enter priesthood and religious life. But this morning, I want you to keep something in mind of what we just celebrated last week. Father Morrow passing. Firstly, he was a human, but he gave his life to the church for 65 years, to the priesthood. And the readings today, I think, reflects his life. When you think of Elijah in our first reading, he was, I believe, a wealthy but ordinary farmer. Father Morrow was, as you know, an ordinary man. Special, not perfect. He was, as he would first admit to that. Now, Father Morrow, growing up, was a strong-willed teenager. And he had a little bit of a temper that got him in trouble in high school. He had a few fights and was encouraged to go into minor seminary so they may be able to discipline him a little bit. Like any teenager, he was a little wild. But every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. And I think of the gospel today. Father Morrow came to the south. Think back, 65 years ago, here in the south, in Georgia. He was ordained for the Savannah diocese. I believe he had only come once to visit Savannah before he was ordained. And you think back, just the history of the South. He was in the middle of the civil rights movement. And coming to Georgia as a Catholic 65 years ago, and as a Catholic priest, there was a lot of suspicion. Who are they? What do they worship? And what are they doing? The gospel reminds us, foxes have dens, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. When you think about it, he came with a lot of uncertainty. At that time, Savannah and Atlanta separated, and we became the Archdiocese of Atlanta. Count the cost. It was a challenge to be a Catholic priest 65 years ago. And yet, in those 65 years as a priest, he founded 2 parishes and pastored over another 7 parishes. He retired 22 years ago here to Christ the King. I think he was one of the most busiest priests compared to half the priests in our own archdiocese. To follow Jesus, he offered nothing of this world, but only the life to come. And that's what Father Moro believed. He left his family and friends, the comfort of family and friends, that life to come here to the south. But he always looked forward to going home for Thanksgiving. It was the highlight of his year. His family reunion and spending time. And he would come back from that family reunion another man, invigorated. Being with nephews and nieces, it was a tremendous blessing to him. He left his parents, his family and friends, to give himself to Christ. He knew he had obligations towards his parents, and he cared for them from a distance. Yet in their autumn years, he brought them back to Atlanta, that he could look after them. From the day of Father Moro's ordination, his parents would have thought, you are no longer my son, you are the son of the church. And Father Moro, as you know, here at Christ the King, took care with God's people. And also, no one puts a hand to the plow and looks back at what he left behind. Father Moro looked forward. He was very forward thinking. He never looked back. Archbishop Belcher and myself had many conversations over the last week and discussed Father Moro and his priesthood. And Father Moro always had a plan. You know, he knew when it was his time to move on as a pastor. Father Moro always looked forward, even at the age of 89. I wish to God he was more in the whole area of technology. Email was not his thing. Texting, forget about it. I lived with him for 11 years. I still did not know his cell phone number. And if you knew Father Moro, he would leave a message on his cell phone. Please don't leave a message, but call my landline. In the rectory, my dear friends, I want to tell you, we have just one phone that works, and it was Father Moro's. And if you drove up to the rectory, you would see the cable coming out the window, across the driveway, down the driveway to the pole. But he was very forward thinking. You and I know that he was in touch with reality. The reality of life, the reality of a priesthood, the reality of marriage, the reality of just striving to be what God desires us to be. In his homilies, he was very forward thinking. In confession, he would move a person forward from sin to new life. Another chance, a new beginning. In his visits to the sick at Piedmont Hospital, he would push people forward, giving them hope, comfort, and consolation. And as you and I know, whether he was on Mass or not, you'd find him hanging outside, greeting with a smile, with kind words, and your day was brighter. I had the privilege over the last number of months every Sunday to celebrate Mass with Father Moro at his bedside. His love for the Eucharist, the Mass, celebrating the Mass, was the most important thing to him. Now, I lived with him for 11 years, and it's the longest I've lived with a brother priest. And sometimes, I'll be honest, it felt like being married. You never knew what you got in the morning, and you never knew what you got in the evening. But it was always good. And the one thing that Father Moore loved was that fellowship. He loved our lunches, just sitting around, enjoying each other's companies, sharing stories. And even though we're all very different, characters, personalities in the rectory, but at the end of the day, what was wonderful is that when we'd come in, we'd end up in the kitchen, chatting, glass of wine, and he would love, and you could see him just enjoying and savoring those moments of just being with priests. I can tell you, my dear friends, in his 65 years as a priest, Father Morrow saved many vocations. Priests that were struggling, that were unsure, uncertain about their own vocation, he reassured them. He walked with them. We are no different from anyone else, and Father Morrow would be the first to say it. We all have our moments in life. Yes, we go and we have to work through things because we are not perfect. The perfect priest is Jesus Christ, and we strive towards that. But we do not walk alone. You know, my dear friends, Father Morrow woke up every morning. He'd be in the kitchen, 2 oranges, a few cups of coffee. He'd read the AJC, and he loved the comics. He'd be there laughing to himself. But even in his retirement, he woke up every day with a plan. Who was he to visit? Who he was to call upon. And if he wasn't out and about visiting, he was on the phone, and I often laugh, there's Father Morrow with his ministry, the telephone ministry. Yes, preaching about vocations to the priesthood and religious life may be a challenge today for our church. To encourage your son or your daughter even to consider the call to priesthood and religious life, there may be a hesitation. Yes, we are saddened by all that is happening. But it does not take from the fact we need priests to serve at God's altar. We need consecrated religious. Father Morrow was a mentor to me for the last 11 years and will continue to be a mentor to me in my years to come wherever I will serve. But I will have to admit, living with a man, working with a man, and I will say the priests of Christ the King are happy priests, delighted to serve God's people. And we always look to him. And so, my dear friends, the challenge I put to you as we reflect on his life, we as a church need to take things serious and to take the call to priesthood and religious life serious, to pray, to encourage. And so, as St. Dominic said, I can do more for you from heaven than I can ever do for you on earth. And that's what I'm going to be praying to Father Morrow, to lift up men and women to priesthood and consecrated life.